planet Arrakis is so beautiful when the sun is low. Rolling over the sands, you can see spice in the air. The outsiders ravage our lands in front of our eyes. Their cruelty to my people is all I've known. What's to become of our world?
Dune Part 1 is a science fiction film released by Warner Bros. Pictures on October 22, 2021. Based on the Frank Herbert novel of the same name, the film was written by John Spatz, Eric Roth, and Denis Villeneuve, who would go on to direct the film. The film stars Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Stellan Skarsgård, Zendaya, and Javier Bardem. You know when a work of literature is cited as one of the most important and influential of an entire genre, you're gonna end up having a field day trying to adapt it. In the case of Frank Herbert's Dune, a seminal sci-fi novel specifically noted for its layered complexity, the difficulty to get something of that caliber on the silver screen is momentous. So you can imagine when it was announced one of the most ambitious, distinctive directors in Hollywood was given the reins to a new adaptation, everyone waited with bated breath for the result. And now that the result has arrived, we find ourselves asking, how is this movie? What identity does it create for itself? In this review, we shoot for the stars, in search of answers for how this story will form its own legacy. Just as a warning, there will be major spoilers ahead. If you wish to see this movie for yourself without knowing anything beforehand, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The story begins in the year 10,191 and is centered around the planet of Arrakis. The desert planet, which is the home of the warrior people known as the Fremen, is the most coveted planet among the galactic houses, as the planet is the only location of the psychoactive drug known as spice, a critical component in achieving interstellar travel. After a violent reign under the brutal House Harkonnen, the Emperor commands the house to leave the planet, assigning rule and spice production to the more temperate and diplomatic House Atreides. Paul Atreides is the son of the Duke Leto Atreides, and is the heir to the House Atreides. He is trained by house aides Gurney Halleck, Duncan Idaho, and Thufir Hawat in preparation for his eventual ascension. However, his mother, a member of the Order of Witches known as the Bene Gesserit, secretly trains him in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, including an art known as the Voice, a superpower that allows its user to control the mind of those they use it on. In the lead-up to the Atreides' annexation of Arrakis, Paul begins to have visions of the future, which he is unable to make sense of. After confiding in his mother about the matter, he is subjected to a horrific test by the head of the Bene Gesserit, who deems him worthy of the power he should not be allowed to possess, as the Bene Gesserit is an order of all females. Leto, Lady Jessica, and Paul arrive on Arrakis, preparing to take over spice harvesting and production following their military forces securing the fortress of Arrakeen. Upon his arrival to the planet, the Fremen take notice of Paul, who they believe to be the one to liberate Arrakis from the constant intrusion of foreign invaders. The Atreides meet with Fremen leader Stilgar and attempt to negotiate a deal in which the Atreides will continue with spice harvesting and production on Arrakis, on the condition that the homes of the Fremen will remain unintruded and undisturbed. While Stilgar favors this deal, he leaves before the negotiation is finalized, but not before taking notice of Paul and telling him how he has seen him before. In the days that follow, Paul's visions begin to become more aggressive and vivid, especially after being exposed to spice during an ill-fated mine inspection turned rescue operation. These visions come to pass when House Harkonnen, with the aid of Sardaukar troops provided by the Emperor, stage an invasion of Arrakis intended to wipe out the House Atreides, whose diplomatic influence threatens the plans of the Emperor. Though Gurney Halleck and the Atreides forces fight valiantly, they are quickly overrun by the opposing forces, and Leto is incapacitated by Dr. Yu, who betrayed the Atreides in an attempt to save his family from the Harkonnens. Leto is brought before the Duke Harkonnen, where he uses a poison-imbued tooth provided by Dr. Yu to make an attempt on Duke Harkonnen's life, at the cost of his own. Duke Harkonnen survives the attempt, and orders his forces to recommence spice production, with the added objective of hunting down and wiping the Fremen from the face of Arrakis. Paul and Lady Jessica are taken into the desert by Harkonnen soldiers, where they are left to die in the desert to circumvent the promise made to the Bene Gesserit that the Harkonnens would not harm Paul or Jessica. Using the voice, the two are able to escape into the desert, where they are eventually rescued by Duncan Idaho and Imperial ecologist Dr. Liet Kynes. Though they take shelter briefly in an abandoned research center, they are set upon by the Sardaukar troops, and though Paul and Jessica escape into a sandstorm with a commandeered aircraft, Duncan and the Doctor are killed helping them escape. Though Paul and Jessica are able to get out of the sandstorm, they are forced to crash land in the desert, forcing them to wander in search of aid from the Fremen. After many days of wandering, and a close encounter with one of the Goliath sandworms native to the desert, Paul and Jessica find a group of Fremen being led by Stilgar. Among the Fremen is a girl named Chani, who Paul has seen in nearly all of his dreams up to that point, leaving Paul somewhat shocked. Though the Fremen are initially set on killing the duo, Stilgar, remembering Paul from the meeting with House Atreides, opts to assist Paul and Jessica's attempts to return to the city, which is reinforced after they hold their own against the Fremen's attempts to take them down. As the Fremen prepare to move out, though, Jamis, who Paul saw as a friend in his visions of the future, argues Stilgar's decision, demanding that a champion come forward and represent Jessica in combat. Paul steps forward, and the two fight. Though Paul is reluctant to fight, especially when he learns this will be a fight to the death, he is eventually forced to strike, killing Jamis. In the final moments of the movie, following his success in the duel, Paul and Jessica are offered a place with the Fremen. Though Jessica wishes to return to the city and get word out about the attack on House Atreides, Paul is beginning to make sense of his visions, and realizes his path is now being laid. He accepts the Fremen's offer, and with that, Paul and Jessica go with the Fremen in the first step to prepare for what is to come. Now, ordinarily, I would feel a bit cheated by an experience like this, as it is a 2+ hour movie that still needs a part 2 to properly finish its narrative. But honestly, thank God they did, because oh my god. This movie is honestly an amazing experience, and everyone should absolutely indulge in it. But you'd better be ready for an all-out assault on the senses if you commit. Bar none, the greatest aspect of the movie is the visual effects. If you're hoping for a movie that pops out at you and leaves stars in your eyes, then this definitely won't disappoint. The CGI is as good as it gets, with scenes like the storming of the fortress, the sandstorm, the rescue of the miners, and many of Paul's visions of the future being standout scenes in this department. The smaller elements of visual design, however, are equally well done, with the combat shields, the flying machines and spacefaring craft, and the audio readings and hologram-type technology adding a lot of visual flair. Coupling this with some striking settings, super in-depth set design, and detail-oriented costume design, and this movie is pretty much sci-fi eye candy at its finest. The sound design of this movie adds quite a lot to giving you a feel for these fantastical eye-catchers. The audio effects with elements like the shields in active use, the spice affecting a character's mind, the weapons used in battle, and the colossal sandworms lurking beneath the surface not only ground the setting, but help to create the massive sense of scale this story sets out to portray. Not to mention the ambient sound in moments like the flying machine being tossed around in the storm, the exploration of the fortress city, and especially in the dream sequences, have a way of really amplifying the emotional tone. Couple that with the tone established by the soundtrack, the absolutely massive universe this story inhabits is truly represented and brought to life in a way that will resonate with all 5 of the senses. The attention to detail from a production standpoint is impossible to argue. This is further solidified by some amazing direction. While the visual effects alone might have been enough to make this a visually striking movie, the way these moments are framed and shot ensures that the major moments of this movie are elevated from incredible to unforgettable. It doesn't matter whether it is a pivotal story moment or a moment of quiet contemplation. The way in which each scene is portrayed is given equal levels of care and thought. But with that said, moments such as the confrontation between Dukes Atreides and Harkonnen, the mining machine being swallowed by the sandworm, Duncan Idaho's escape from the fortress, and his last stand, and the dream sequences of Paul in the latter half of the movie will likely go down as iconic imagery in the sci-fi genre of movies. Dune's world building is among some of the most intricate yet focused setting developments you will see in any movie anywhere. With so many elements at play, it would almost be downright understandable that the story could fall apart in the hands of an aspiring adapter. But given how much information this story had to juggle, it ended up presenting and explaining it fairly effectively. Every element of the world, from the political parties involved, to the social and cultural dynamics of every party at play, to the economic ramifications of the planet of Arrakis, is blended and woven together in a way where all these confusing and conflicting points of interest are brought together as one woven narrative that uses its complexity to create intrigue that makes the stakes of what's to come all the higher. And while this reviewer cannot at the moment speak to how well the events of the book are represented, he can confidently say that the movie is quite adept in sharing everything you need to know about the narrative it sets out to portray. Yet despite how freakishly strong this movie is in its presentation, it is not a perfect example of how to tell a sci-fi story, because despite how much wonder the vastness of the story can inspire, the vastness of the story is a weakness as much as it is a strength. The pacing is easily the biggest and most noticeable pitfall of the movie. This is a long one, and while it is usually pretty entertaining, it throws a lot, and I do mean a lot of information at you. Almost every new scene presents you with some kind of revelation, piece of world building, or just general information about what's happening. And it truly gets to a point where if you're not giving every minute of the movie 100% of your attention, you will inevitably end up missing something. And while it may not be a piece of information critical to the big picture, you can still believe that you'll end up pretty confused about, well, something. While it is true that these near countless elements of the world of Dune are woven together in a sensible way, it's just so densely packed that it's liable to make your head explode. The dialogue is very tight-knit, cleverly weaving together all the necessary elements of the narrative and wasting no time and no line in building up the importance of everything, from individual character moments to expository build-up, to the epic moments that define this movie. That said, it requires a lot of care and attention on the audience's part to keep up with what's being said and which part of the story it factors into. So if you happen to have the memory or attention span of a goldfish, you might want to keep that rewind finger handy. The acting is a bit of a point of contention. While the performances are well executed and dedicated, it's hard to say that anyone really gets the chance to shine through in a big way. While Oscar Isaac, Stellan Skarsgård, and Jason Momoa are easily remembered for their impact on the story, and the likes of Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, and Dave Bautista really dig into the scenery, it's hard to relate to them or feel connected to them as people given just how much of the focus is placed on creating setting. The massive scale of world building on display causes the storytelling to take a hit. While there aren't any important story beats left out regarding what's happening or why certain characters are important and what makes them stand out, it's so jam-packed with development that there's little or no time left over to flesh out the more human and psychological aspects of the characters or what motivates them. Couple that with the mental drain caused by the world-building overload, and you may find it somewhat hard to care, let alone keep up with what's happening on screen. While I can't criticize the decision to split the movie into multiple parts, given just how much is thrown at you in part 1 alone, it unfortunately creates a disconnect in the story that literally cannot be filled until you're able to plug the gap with a follow-up viewing in 2023, or whenever you have at-home access to both of these movies. And given how the story will likely be jumping face first into the narrative of part 2, it's gonna take either a good long memory or many rewatches to be fully prepared for what's to come. The final rating for this pilgrimage through the cosmos is 7.5 out of 10. While it is an absolutely spectacular show of prowess in cinematography, boasting visual effects and design that will take your breath away, and world building that puts the competition to shame, that same world building ends up being a curse as much as a feature, taking away from the dialogue and performances, and overstuffing the 2.5-hour runtime with more information than you can reasonably take in one go. However, if you are patient or compulsive enough to sit down and tune out everything around you for a while, Dune is a sci-fi experience that is just as, if not more rewarding than any other. With that in mind, it seems this reviewer has some literary homework to catch up on. No spoilers from the book, you crazy comment section fiends. That's all we've got for today. Thanks for stopping by. If you feel it's worth the while, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. And if there's a movie you want to see reviewed, leave your suggestions down in the comments. Also, if you're feeling especially generous, consider following me on Twitter @Untrained for updates and other nonsense. There's plenty more to come, so if you care enough to return for it, then I'll see you when I see you.